0.4 Step 2, Unforgettable Openings and Provocative Endings. Our lesson objective for this lesson, students will be able to write a first draft of the college application essay. So I already talked to you a little bit about openings and endings when I went through the criteria in the last lesson, but I do think it's worth us spending some more time talking about, how do you do it? How do you come up with this unforgettable opening? How do you come up with this provocative ending? Because it is criterion 2, right? Thoughtful structure guides the reader through the text. The piece has an unforgettable opening, an engaged middle, and a provocative end. Means after somebody reads it, they remember how the essay started. Provocative means long after they've read it, they are still thinking about something interesting about that ending. All right. So these are hard to do, and you're not going to come up with it necessarily in the first draft. It's going to take you some time. And so keep that in mind as you work on it. And let me give you some tips on how you can do it, because this is going to be a really good way for you to stand out from that crowd of 6,999 other essays that the reader is reading. Let's start with this quote from Ursula K. Le Guin, an amazing author of science fiction. First sentences are doors to worlds. So you want to help your reader open that door to this world about the best you in your college application essay. Have you ever heard about this, the airport test? The airport test is something that editors of thrillers use to determine how good an opening line is. They think about it this way. They think, okay, let's imagine our reader has to take a 4-hour flight, and they're not going to be able to use electronics for some reason, or they don't want to have to. They want a good read for those 4 hours. So they go into the bookshop at the airport and they read a first line. Is that first line good enough that they're going to want to buy that book, pay money to spend time reading it? That's the kind of opening line that you want. Something that would make someone want to buy your writing. It's that good. Here's an opening line that I think is pretty, even though it's not a thriller, is pretty airport test worthy. You better never tell nobody but God. It'd kill your mammy. So the first 2 sentences of the book, The Color Purple by Alice Walker, these are words spoken by an abusive father to his daughter. It's one of the most sinister and haunting opening lines in all of fiction. Like the rest of this masterpiece, it is gripping and impossible to forget. How about this one from George Orwell's 1984, one of the most famous dystopian novels ever written. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Wait, 13? We don't have 13 hours. We don't have a 13 o'clock. What kind of world have I landed in? We're wondering as we start this, making us want to read on. Now, you're not creating a new universe necessarily, right? Or haunting us with something terrifying. However, you are creating a new place, a new scenario, a new episode for your reader. And so you do want to think very carefully about that opening line and let yourself come back to it, revise to make it even more effective as you work on this essay. One really effective strategy, I think, for the college application essay is to use in medias res. In medias res is a Latin phrase meaning in the midst of things or in the middle of things. And so you see in the picture there, the body falling. They're falling. They aren't jumping off. They aren't landing. They are in the middle of the fall. That's what in medias res is. Probably the most famous In Medias Res opening line is from Virginia Woolf's novel, Mrs. Dalloway. And it simply reads, Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself. And in this line, we know that something has already happened. There's a reason for buying flowers. There was at least a suggestion of someone else buying them or an idea that that might happen. But she said she would buy them herself. Why is she buying them? Doesn't she trust someone else? What is the occasion that she's buying these flowers? We have those kinds of questions as readers as we are put in the middle of this scenario. How about this one from one of the student sample essays in this unit? Here I sit, rewriting this essay for the 5th time in the last 3 days. And as I wonder why I'm having trouble now when I have breezed through countless essays before, my friend's words echo in my mind. You have trouble because you're not used to writing about yourself. This is such an effective opening, and it sort of breaks rules, right, that we would normally think we wouldn't want to do, because the writer is stating, their own writing process in the beginning of this essay. But it's a really good example of in medias res, because the speaker, the writer, is in the middle of trying to write this essay and then is brought back to this quote from a friend. How about this one? I have never done this before. With the burning sun right over my head, I walk on the dry dirt, making my way towards a dusty room with only 3 rectangular tables, a desk in the front, and 4 benches equal in length. There is no door to open. I take a look at the walls and floor that look like they have been made by a mixture of dried mud and cement, but mostly mud. I have never done this before. This is an effective opening line in medias res. The speaker, the narrator, is in the middle of some kind of adventure, something that they haven't experienced in the past, and we start right there with them in the middle of things. Here's another one. This one is a bit of a trick, and it spills onto the next page. I screamed for help as I watched my friend Carl go under the murky surface of the lake, but there was no one in sight. In my heart, I knew it was too late. From my relatively safe spot on a makeshift raft, my eyes scanned the water, hunting for any sign of survival. One wrong move could send me fumbling into the dark water to the same fate. There was nothing I could have done to keep him above the water once his hand slipped from my grasp. Yet I suddenly felt selfish. I could have easily made room for him on my raft before he went under. His death was my fault. All right, that's good, remarked the cameraman. To his left stood a few, I can't see it because it's blocked by the numbers, with a boom mic. A few students with a boom mic. Okay, so this one's a bit of a trick, right? The opening line is, I screamed for help as I watched my friend Carl go under the murky surface of the lake, but there was no one in sight. And so that certainly hooks you in. We're in the middle of things, and it feels like we're in the middle of like a tragedy, right? And then we find out by the end of the introduction that we're really on the set of some kind of student-made film, and so it's kind of a fun trick in a way. But it does begin in the middle of things and is effective and is kind of clever too. I have a feeling the college application essay readers on this college board would get a pleasant chuckle from this. Okay, so that is openings. What to avoid for openings? Well, you want to avoid the old-fashioned 5-paragraph essay hook. You were taught at one time to do a quote, startling statement, rhetorical question, definition, one of those things. And now we're moving beyond expository writing where this is appropriate, and you're moving into creative writing, you're moving into narrative writing, this personal essay. So you want it to be something more than one of those old-fashioned hooks. You're going to avoid that style of expository writing in this essay I will discuss. And anything that feels like an expository essay, a 5-paragraph essay, an academic literary analysis kind of essay, all of the writing basically that you've done up until now. So this is a little bit different. I understand that. And so that's why I'm trying to help you with this, because it's kind of a different angle on what you've done in the past. All right, repetition and variance is a great technique to use for conclusions. Your conclusion, first of all, should be very short. You want it to be the shortest part of your essay, but you don't want it to just end. You want to leave the reader with some thoughts. The best way to do that is to come back to something early on in the essay, in the opening, preferably. So repeat something from the opening, change it slightly to enhance your point. So you're repeating, but you're varying it. You're changing it. That's the repetition and variance. Maybe it's an image, maybe it's a phrase, an event, a piece of dialogue, one word in particular, but it should be central to the idea that you are trying to convey. So you're going to repeat and vary to make your point. Use it again, changing it a little bit to make your point. So one of the best examples of this is that Naive Enough to Learn essay, which I already talked to you once about. It's the one where it starts off, I was 16 years old when I saved my first life, and he's talking about a kid who jumps into the pool with seemingly confidence, but really he was just naive, right? He didn't know how to swim, and he would have drowned had the narrator not been there. And by the end, he comes back to the idea of naivete, right? And he thinks about how, in my mind, a naive person is someone who has a lot to learn and by nature will not give up until they understand. And I am a very naive person. So he flips it on its head. At first, he's like, there's this dumb, naive kid that I had to save. And then by the end, he's like, hey, wait a minute. Being naive is good because it means you're willing to take risks, to explore new things. And that's me. I'm that person too. And so that's a really good example of repetition and variance. Forgiving My Father is another good example of repetition and variance. He uses in 5 minutes repeatedly, talking about like the 5 minutes of like the end of a fight where his father actually decides to leave. And then he comes back to the father's leaving and says that, it's not just about this tragic thing that's happened to me, this traumatic thing that's happened to me. I am going to not do the same thing to others. I'm going to do the opposite of what he did to me. So if you can take something from the beginning of your essay and repeat it in the end, but change it a little bit, it can be a really effective way to leave a thought-provoking ending. Other tips, if you can find a title in the last lines of your essay, you probably have a successful ending. If questions feel answered, questions that came up early, if your reader has questions as they're reading, they should all be answered by the end. And this is the key, right? That it's thought-provoking enough that it leaves the reader thinking about it. Good luck as you write your first draft. I hope these tips were helpful.